Today I'd like to continue talking about motivation and goal setting. And the question I want to address today is whether we are really the author of the goals that we decide to set and pursue. Thus far in the 3 previous talks, I focused on how we motivate ourselves, and I suggested that most of us find motivation by setting a goal of something we want to attain in the future. Unfortunately, I also noted that it's very common to fail at our goals, and we can see this if we think about New Year's resolutions and how difficult it is to reach those. And I gave you a model of 3 ingredients that are required to reach our goals. And those ingredients are standards, which is some idea of what you're trying to attain, monitoring to check on whether you have to make adjustments. And then the 3rd ingredient, which I've suggested is the most important, is self-control resources. Finding some way to change your typical way of behaving and responding and to override it because of something that's more important in the future. And unfortunately, self-control seems to be a limited resource for each of us. And my belief is that most of us are maxed out on how much self-control we're already using in our everyday lives. So the challenge when we have a goal is to find some self-control resources, despite the fact that we're using up so much of it. Last week I told you one trick. It's kind of a cognitive trick, which is to develop an implementation plan that specifies when, where, and how you're going to pursue it, and it makes the goal pursuit automatic. Today I'll teach you a motivational trick, so let me explain. Today I'll start to talk about the research I've been doing here at McGill for the last 15 years or so. We do a study every September, a longitudinal study, which means we follow people over the whole school year. We follow students, we follow community adults. And what we're interested in doing is tracking the personal goals that students have for the new year. And this paradigm we use, it basically consists of 4 things that we do. We pick a starting point when we think many people might be generating goals. And I think the start of a new school year is a time when I know I always had some new goals. And then we ask them to think about and list 3 personal goals that they might have for this year. And we define it as projects that you're thinking about planning and that you hope to carry out. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to succeed or complete it, and they could be more or less difficult, and they could be in any area of your life. I'll show you some of the collections of goals that students have written. So here's the first example I'll give you is students said, I want to maintain straight A's, I want to feel financially secure, and I want to lose weight on my thighs. Academic goals are very common. Almost every student, I would say 85% of McGill students have an academic goal for the year. Financial security, I don't see too often. Weight loss is a very common goal, unfortunately. So, those are the 3 goals. They're somewhat specific. They could be more specific. Okay, the next person, they say they want to get a high GPA this semester. They want to find new bars or clubs or restaurants in Montreal, and they want to plan a road trip across Canada. When I looked at this, I've used this example in my class before. I was just struck that the second and third ones aren't things you could do in the current world we're living in. The last collection is I want to Skype my close friends and family at least once every 2 weeks. That's a social goal, and interestingly, only about 10 or 15% of goals people generate are social goals, and I think that's one of the mistakes we make. We focus too much on achievement and not enough on social things. And there's some evidence that the social goals are the ones that really pay off in terms of the quality of our life. Okay, the next one is I want to procrastinate less on my assignments and get tasks done. So that's the academic goal for this person. The last one I like, it's I want to put myself out there and be more confident in organizing gatherings with new friends. I like this collection of these goals because they seem well thought out, they seem authentic, you get a sense of who the person is. And the last one's actually a personality change goal, which many of us when we go to university, we're kind of hoping that we'll be more extroverted, more conscientious, and I'll talk about that at another time. So those are some examples of the goals. What we do then is we follow up people like 6 times over the course of the year. We find out whether they feel like they're making progress or not. We also look at their well-being, which is positive and negative emotions. And what we find is if you have 3 goals, maybe you'll feel like you succeeded at one of them. But it's even that isn't always possible. And whether you succeed or not does impact your well-being. We always feel better when we're making progress at our personal goals, and we feel a little worse when we feel we're not making progress. The other thing we do in our studies is we ask people, why are you trying to pursue these goals? And the reason we ask this is because there's something paradoxical about our personal goals. And that is when you look carefully at them, and if you ask people why they're setting them, what you find out is that even though the goal is self-generated and self-initiated, in a funny way, they're not really self-endorsed. So that many of us are setting personal goals that aren't really coming from us. They're more about what we think we should do, or what we've learned we should do, or what others are doing. So let me give you some examples. The first study I ever found on resolutions was from 1964. It was in a school psychology journal, and it was done in the United States. And what they did was they got 6th graders to sit down in classrooms, and they told them, you have to give us a list of your New Year's resolutions. The average student, when they were required to generate New Year's resolutions, came up with like 6 or 7 of them. That's way too many. But here are some of the ones. Multiple kids put this. So, do my homework on time. Don't tease my sister. Eat less candy. Brush my teeth. Improve my posture. And my favorite ones are be a loyal citizen and help the United States. I think if I was a 6th grader in the United States now, I would make those resolutions. But with this list, I think what's striking is you look at it and you think, these kids haven't set these goals. These kids are just saying what they think their teachers want to hear or what their parents want to hear. So that the process of setting a goal is really thinking about what do the authorities want me to say or what do the authorities want me to pursue. And what I'll suggest is that, unfortunately, many of us are like these American 6th graders in the 1960s, and we set some goals that aren't really our own, that are more about what we think we should be doing. So what we do in our research is we ask people through a survey and a series of questions, why are you following these goals? And what we try to get at is whether people have goals that connect with their interest and important personal values, or are the goals more about something that you feel pressure to do? And that pressure can come from other people around you, or it could come from pressures that we've interjected. And what we're trying to get at is whether people want to pursue the goal or whether they feel they have to pursue the goal. We want to get at whether they feel like, boy, I get to pursue this goal, or do they feel like they got to pursue the goal? And really what we're after is how autonomous do they feel? How volitional? Do they have a sense of personal ownership and endorsement? The key thing is to feel wholehearted about the goal rather than half-hearted. Unfortunately, for many of the goals that we have by the time we're 20 years old, we're very conflicted and ambivalent, and there's competing pressures. So to some extent, they may reflect our interests and our values, but lots of times there's things that we feel pressured to do. And in my studies, we find that to the extent that you feel pressured and obligated, you're much less likely to make progress. Instead, you want to feel like you're pursuing things that are interesting and personally meaningful. And when you do that, there's some wonderful things that happen in goal pursuit. You find it easier to find the effort that you need. It's almost subjectively as if it's easy to put forth the effort. You don't have to push yourself. We also find that it's easier to resist distractions and temptations. And if you have an action crisis where you begin doubting whether you should pursue this goal, when you're autonomous, you can work through it more easily. Across, I would say, 30 studies that we've done now, we find that autonomous goals are the ones that we make the most success at. And if you have a greater number of autonomous goals, you're more likely to succeed. When I look at the New Year's resolutions where I failed and the ones I succeeded, what I tend to see is that the failed ones are the ones where I felt mostly controlled about doing them. And the ones where I succeeded are the ones where I felt more volitional and autonomous. So I think the things that I would recommend to you is really reflect on why you're pursuing this goal. Is it in tune with your interests and your personal values? If it's not, is there a way to make it more in tune? Both my own lab and many other labs have shown that starting with a goal that you feel autonomous about, and by that I mean you feel wholeheartedly like this is something I'm interested in and that I care about and that's meaningful, that gives you the best shot. Okay, I'll say more next class.